Disaster Relief and the NAACP in Tampa. So please help me welcome Dana. Our second panelist is Pamela Gomez with the Florida Immigration Coalition. Pam is also from the Dominican Republic. Her family migrated to the Virgin Islands in the early 1990s in search for better education and more economic opportunities. They relocated to Tampa in 2005, where she completed her undergraduate education in sociology and is pursuing graduate degrees in Latin America and Caribbean Studies at the University of South Florida.
Excuse me, which island?
I'm sorry?
Virgin Islands.
Which island is in the Virgin Islands?
St. Thomas.
St. Thomas.
Focused on race, gender, migration, and educational issues. As an Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Taína, she works to build on the connection between her indigenous and African diasporic roots and combat oppression, racism, and inclusion in the transnational community. In 2005, Pam joined the Florida Immigrant Youth Network and Students Working for Equal Rights. Pamela has coordinated civic engagement efforts with Democracia USA and Mi Familia Vota in 2012, achieving voters' participation goals of over 12,000 registered voters and hundreds of engaged community members. She has also worked on parent engagement and empowerment initiatives with the Florida Institute of Community Studies in 2013 and also Hispanic Services Council in 2014. Currently, she is part of the membership and leadership of Dominican Association of Tampa and LULAC, Florida. Please help me welcome Pamela. And thank you so much for being with us today. Why don't we start by just having a quick introduction as to how each of you got involved with this work, in the work that you're currently doing, your personal story.
It was a lot of years ago. I'm not as young as I look. I think I started activism in the early 80s in Jacksonville, Florida. As a member of the mayor's teen volunteers. We thought it was cute because it made MTV back when it was a thing, right? Later, I joined the AmeriCorps, which was like the Domestic Peace Corps. So I was a member of the NCCC. And so it was paramilitary, it was an alternative to military service. And we said that our goal was to promote domestic pride and responsibility and get things done through community service. Working in the communities like that and feeling empowered really changed my sense of agency as a Black woman that had grown up in the South, right? Like I can be a part of these solutions. And so it set me on that trajectory, right? Fundraising, community organizations, community gardens became all things that I got involved in until I became a part of the political scene, which is very vibrant in Denver, as you might imagine, now that they've thrown weed in the mix. Literally, the literal mile high city.
That's to clarify everything.
You have to ask what's in these cookies. Working in Denver as a community organizer, an all African American voter registration information project, political director for the Colorado Black Women for Political Action, turned into being a field operative, turned into a political consultant, turned into me saying, you know what, I just want to have a cleaning business. So I moved around, worked in Seattle on the marijuana initiatives, wrote a couple of, saw them fail, New York, did some things in New York with job development after Sandy to put people back to work, and accidentally ended up in Tampa to work on the Charlie Crist campaign as operating a couple offices in Tampa, and saw that there was much more need in Tampa for what we were doing than there was in, say, Seattle. I mean, because they have marijuana, they don't need it. See my theme here?
You can't show that. You can't.
And I will be here until we get it recreational. And so in Tampa, the landscape is very different. The tension between what I think of as progressive politics and what many Tampanians and coastal dwellers think of as progressive politics what I think of as progressive politics looks more like radical politics to most progressives in Florida, because the center is further away from me. And so then the left is further away. And so I am here working on multiple levels. You know, we're doing some radical, non-horizontal organizing, and then there's some very, let's be kind and say traditional organizing with the NAACP. Cough, cough. And then there is our very modern, millennial-focused, that captures that zeitgeist in Black Lives Matter and the Redneck Revolt and all of these organizations that have emerged, kind of saying, you know, to hell with it, let's try everything all at once. It's very staccato and very exciting, and it feels like tattoos and piercings and gauges, and I love it, even though I'm kind of old.
And Pam, how do you get involved in the work that you do?
I think it starts out at a very young age, like when we're born into this world, into different identities and into the families that we're born in. I definitely think it came to me at a very young age. My family, as I mentioned before, immigrated to the Caribbean, to another part of the Caribbean, because we're originally from the Caribbean, from the Dominican Republic. But my grandparents are farmers in the Dominican Republic. So I understood inequality from a very young age. And like my dad migrated to Tortola, which he was one of the first one in my family to migrate. So I feel that, like...
Excuse me, migrated to Coca-Cola? I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Tortola.
To Tortola! Oh, I beg
So I feel that as through the struggles of our families, we understand what we're called to do from a very, very young age, right? So for me, it was this identity as like when my older brother and I also joined my parents who had already gone to the islands. It was that fight, right? For immigrant justice, it was that fight for equality, education. We were undocumented in the Virgin Islands, so that had a very different experiences through our lives and through our life struggles. And through that, like my family was one of the lucky few that were able to fix our status one way or another through a glitch. And after we migrated to Tampa, I think it was building on those identities and understanding like who I was in this world and then like what I was called to do in the work. And for me, over the years, it has been access to education through fighting through the DREAM Act for undocumented youth, because a lot of immigrant parents like leave like for their kids for a better future, right? So it was that and connecting like solidarity, because even though at that point in my life I was already with status, I knew that I owe it to my peers that we had to continue that fight, right? So it has been that, and then also as a Black woman and my racial identities and how that intertwined with all my different identities as a immigrant woman, as a young woman, and as an Afro-descendant woman who identify both with my indigenous and my Black experiences, coming from an island, having colonization, and understanding what all that mixture means to me and like whatnot. But for me, it has been that, like meeting at the intersections of my life, and then how I stand up with solidarity with other folks who may be at the same point and who may not. So I joined the movement for Black Lives. I've joined many others in the streets to fight, and also not in the streets, also in the background, organizing my community to stand up for themselves, because we are not the voiceless, we do have a voice. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So just tell us a little bit more about your organizations and their objectives or goals and things that you may be working on right now. And if you could go as far as also, you know, tell us about any legislation that you are supporting as well.
Well, I start with, I know that we're going to talk about BLM, but I want to talk about mutual aid disaster relief, which we just kind of stumbled into. Shortly before Hurricane Irma was going to hit, there was a community meeting called by two people in our community who, you know, very altruistic folks. They've just been at it forever. They went to jail to be able to share food, to give us the right to share food in Hillsborough County, Desiree Lynn and Jimmy Dunson. Well, Jimmy had been working on this for years. I'd been getting the emails, but I never participated. When we thought Irma was going to be a Category 5, we quickly started to like put our ducks in a row. So I went to this meeting, and I got there late, of course. I was sitting on the floor and I thought, you know, I'm looking at these people and I'm thinking this may be the last time we are like stress-free and showered and happy. You know, we don't know what's going to happen to our town. At the time, we were discussing a plan for how we were going to show up as a community to support each other in the aftermath of a possible direct hit. So we put calls out. We put up a Facebook page the next day. We put calls out for things like canoes, chainsaws. We called on other organizations who wanted to be in solidarity with that preparation. Everyone came to the table, irregardless of the relationships in the organizing community. Those strings can be invisible but very tense. People came willingly and put their differences aside and worked really hard. And so, because I work with Reverend Meyer, we talked about that this morning, I have a contract to do cleaning on that church, and I was cleaning the parsonage in preparation for another church, micro church moving in. And so I said in the meeting, could we use this space, like just for, you know, to stage afterwards? And we could shelter in the church since they have bulletproof windows and steel arches. We could shelter in this church and then go over the next morning and then go out and start surveying our community. And the board director of the church was there, and she says, well, you know, I'll talk about that. So Desiree Lynn, who is an incorrigible force of nature, said, let's go see it right now. I was like, well, I gotta go talk to you. You have the key. I said, yes. So we go in, and then she starts taking my cleaning stuff off the carts and started rearranging the house. She made a room into a clinic. I said, what am I gonna tell the pastor? What are we doing? Like in here, it's breaking and entering. And Des is just busy. She's got the mop bucket. She's gone to town, right? And so when the pastor, I said, I have to show you something, pastor. Come with me. And he's like, what's going on? I said, just come with me. I said, look, you heard about Joe Osteen, right? We don't want that to happen to you. So, because we know your heart. Look what we've done to this space. No one is going to accuse you of not opening the doors of your church because look at this. And he said, well, Donna, we'll have to work backwards on this. I will get this approved. And so we got the space approved. And the next morning we holed up in the church. And my friends are pretty wild. They did some bad things. Like they almost got blown away smoking cigarettes outside. They almost got swept away by Irma trying to have a cigarette. But we made it through the storm. And the next morning we went right over to the hub. And we started to go out with the chainsaws. Some people came in. These were some badass people we'd never seen before. They came in with BDUs on and combat boots, hitched up the canoe, and they went to Jacksonville where they had heard it was flooding. So we became like a central hub. People were coming from all over the country, based on Des and Jimmy's network, because they understood what we were doing. We took 10 tons of food in one weekend into Key West. Wow. In the course of Irma and around Irma, we moved 200,000 pounds of food through that space. We had a pantry where people could come in, and there was no limit on what they could take. They could self-determine their needs, right? And we had a poster there that says, we believe that in a disaster, people are autonomous and have the agency to designate, you know, what their needs are and to have them met in solidarity by their communities. And so this thing happened, and something happened in the church. This is a very conservative church, and they were like, how can we help? And then a check started to be written for the hub to remain open, where it still is today, where we have free clinics, where we have meetings. It's a space that can be used by the community for organizing. The doctors just showed up after the storm. No one asked them. They just showed up and started seeing people and ripped out prescription pads and started taking care of people. Started giving people foot baths that were diabetic and couldn't get into their doctors. Well, the thing with Irma was very short-lived for us in Tampa. And we still have the pantry. People can still come to the pantry during the hours that we're open and receive take a shower if they need to. But a magical thing happened next. When Maria hit Puerto Rico, a young Puerto Rican woman came in tears and said, I want to do something for my island. And so what that turned into was 10 of us going into the island, and with tents and sleeping bags and tactical backpacks and medic bags, and administering care to people in the mountains where FEMA was saying was inaccessible. Greg shows up with Des, they went in first, shows up at FEMA in San Juan, and says, we're here for the meeting. We're told to go to the meeting. They go to the meeting, and after these military higher-ups said they didn't know, well, so where's the FEMA warehouse so we could go in the morning? We don't know where the FEMA warehouse is, they said. Yeah. But we're 501c3. We don't know where the FEMA warehouse is. So this guy's from New York. So what he did, he Googled it. And the next morning they show up at FEMA with these badges that an FSU professor, USF professor, so brilliantly anticipated we would need. We're mutual aid disaster relief here for a 9 a.m. pickup. Very official, I like that. And they said, we don't have any mutual aid anything on here. Oh, well, we talked to this guy last night. I didn't know that guy. All right, let's look again. No, we don't. Just come on in. And what that turned into is we have receipts. We have actual receipts. You know, people say that the millennials say we have the receipts. We have actual, literal receipts of us picking up over 60 tons of food over 10 days. And we delivered it to places like the Campos Los Olvidados in Utuado, where the bridge broke in half. This bridge is 4 stories high. And they said the water came up over the bridge and shook it all night long like a baby until the bridge just collapsed. And you could see these huge, powerful concrete barriers laying on the ground. We had to walk over the river on rocks, which was really low, animals dying, and climb up these stories to get to the other side of the bridge where the people were. 29 families cut off from society. Army Corps of Engineers, nowhere in sight. Took 9 days before they actually saw another human being that wasn't part of their community, and all they had was their church and their hope. And they told us that story. We did an interview. We're in the process of making a documentary. We'll be back in Puerto Rico on the 7th of December. And Ruth and I and Greg and who else? Oh, national published an attorney will be our legal observer, because I'll tell you later, so Pam can answer this question. But I'll tell you later how they raided us in the last night that we were in, second to last night we were in Puerto Rico. Like literally the SWAT was on the roof. And I'll tell you how that happened, but that's another question. And we're going back into Louisa to tell the stories of people of African descent. And we are going to patch together a documentary. We're going to do a lot of things that we have planned to make a movie about what's happening in Puerto Rico. We're going to do some guerrilla filmmaking. And the people says, we're not journalists. I said, haha, it's 2017, everybody's a journalist.
Thank you so much. The same question for you, Pam. Just tell us a little bit more about the work of the organization, the goals and objectives in any legislation that you guys are supporting as well.
Okay. So I'll say a little bit about FLIC. FLIC is a statewide alliance of over 60 member organizations, which includes farm workers, student, labor, unions, legal service providers, advocates, you name it. Like, we are everyone and everything. Because as we shared, immigrants make up so much of our intersections are all over the place. So with FLIC, is like we believe in the equal treatment of all and the fair treatment. And we fight for a Florida where we can live and love without fear. And what does that mean? That for years we have been fighting for a statewide driver's license, so that folks can have the opportunity to go home, take their kids to school, go to work without fear. It also means over the years we've fought for in-state tuition. As you know, the cost of tuition for out-of-state folks who are barely making it, and if they want to go to college, and if they're undocumented, that's triple the time or triple the cost. So we fought 11 years for in-state tuition, and that was all because of the leadership of people like our badass policy director, who's moving on to another role with local progress, but Francesca has paved the way and left a tremendous legacy at FLIC, including this 11-year fight for in-state tuition for undocumented youth. And also we have defeated anti-immigrant bills year after year, including 2011 when we had a copycat. Arizona, the SB 1070 that would racialize legal profiling in the state. We had people from all around the the state and people even outside of the state that voiced and went up to Tallahassee. And we had thousands of folks, including Reverend Myers in the back, go up to Tallahassee, fill those halls, and make sure that we would not make of Florida another Arizona in that sense, and that our immigrant families wouldn't feel that their lives were even more targeted, right? So this year we are under a similar threat. Last year we defeated, and the year before, last year and the year before, we defeated 9 anti-immigrant bills. 9. And that took, I moved to Tallahassee for 3 months for the whole session and organized the local community to make sure that people knew what was happening, because I feel that they obviously put Tallahassee all the way up there by purpose. So it's far from constituent and people who can voice their voice. So I was there. Mostly all the families that were involved were immigrant families, but we had also a lot of solidarity from allies and people who were not immigrants. But it was beautiful for me. The most beautiful part of that was obviously working with mothers and children that have made of Tallahassee their home, and saw the need, right, to go up to the legislators and share their stories. We had police officers, like, obviously trying to stop that process from happening and people speaking to their constituent. I remember that last year we had 2 cops, like, run with guns to chase children. And obviously the black woman in the room, Francesca, myself included, were the ones stopping that. And when we saw that these officers didn't even care that these were kids, and we stood right in front of them, and children who were just like sharing their stories. So that's the kind of climate we live in Florida, and I feel a lot of people don't know. And then this year we're fighting another bill that I wanted to share. I have like a little bit more of information so you guys could make sure to share with your communities and also help us, because this year is going to be as hard in this fight, to make sure that our families don't continue being criminalized. Yeah, that our families don't continue being criminalized in the ways that they have for centuries. Yeah, we live in a country that was founded on indigenous genocide and the enslavement of black people. And then we have descendants of colonization who are now telling us that we don't have a right to be here and we don't have a right to exist, and then target our families. And it's very sad every day in this work, but also very empowering when we see the ways that our community comes together for our dignity, and to say, hey, like, we are the ones picking up your crops, we're the ones doing all this other stuff, and it's not only our labor, but we deserve, our humanity will be uplifted, and our stories will not become like a back story issue, right? So I'm very proud of the work that FLIC does, and I'm very proud to be part of what we have done. And with that, I'll share a little bit of numbers. So and I'll ask this question: when you guys hear the stories, when you guys hear about immigrants in this country in the news, what are you hearing? Like, what are the words that come up?
Hard workers with a dream.
DACA.
Yeah, but more the negative side of the story. Like, what are in reality are we hearing?
The other side is terrible.
Yeah.
The other side is MS-13 and all kinds of terrible stuff associating immigrants with crime.
The crime, criminals,
Criminals,
rapists, terrorists,
Stealing American jobs.
Draining the welfare system.
Yes.
Hardly.
Yeah.
Supplementing the social security system is more like
Yeah. So we understand where this like xenophobic climate of fear comes from, and just to share like some numbers, like 51% of immigrants are women, right? So that means 51% like are women with children, right? And women, a lot of immigrants come from all parts of the world. Immigrants come from all parts of the world. So what does that mean? That, as I shared about intersections, right? That means that we have black women from Africa, from the Caribbean. We have indigenous women from Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and every other place. We have so many women, and like now what we're seeing with the detention rates are that most people who are in detention are women. So it is a very, unlike in Florida, we have one of the biggest detention facilities in the country, which is Broward Transitional Center down south. And one of the other things that Flick has done is like we stopped one detention center from being built, which was going to be in the Palm Beach area with our campaign, CCA Go Away. So CCA is a massive for-profit prison company. And so it's CCA and GEO, which are the two biggest like for-profit. So for every immigrant it is detained, like these people are backing up or are suffering. So I'm very proud that Flick was like we organized and we were able to not have another like detention facility be built in the state of Florida. And that was all through like the organizing that was done to stop that with our CCA Go Away campaign. So going down to what we're fighting now is like obviously with all the different stuff that we're fighting, but is something that I wanted to share is this bill, HB 9 and SB 308, which is the federal immigration enforcement bill that has been introduced for this legislative session. And it's an anti-sanctuary bill, but with a lot of enforcement and penalties. So what does that mean? It means that it would legalize once again racial profiling, divert local resources. It's anti-democratic, which means that the governor could have the power to remove elected officials from office who want to protect the communities, like any communities that have welcoming policies or any communities that are pro-immigrant in any way. So economic contributions of immigrants will be undermined, the immigrant workforce will be more vulnerable and targeted, increased fear, distrust with local law enforcement and public safety. So that means that like anyone who's a victim of crime and they like call the police for any reason, like, you know, that trust will not be there. Impact victims, they will be more fearful to report crime, and opening up local governments for liability. Texas just passed a bill similar to this one, and it got ruled in the courts that it's unconstitutional and illegal, and like most of it. So we know through what our sisters and brothers from Texas have shared that, you know, it's detrimental that we stop this bill from hitting the ground. So what we're doing, so this bill got introduced into only one committee next Tuesday. And what is next Tuesday? Election day. So they thought we were not watching, and they put this bill and it's the only bill being heard. So we're mobilizing to Tuesday. Our goal is to pack the room and have all our community show out and voice all the ways that this bill would impact our families and members of our community. We already have like over 100 people who have committed to going. And we invite everyone in this room, if you have the time and if you want to join us on Tuesday to stop this bill, please join us. But that's what we're doing. We're trying to, right now, as we speak, we're trying to organize to make sure that in this only one committee that should have had more of our community voicing, like these people are intentionally making sure that we don't show up and we don't shut this shit down. And that's what we're going to do coming Tuesday. Yeah.
So I do have a couple of more questions about, you know, actions and things that we can do to help. But before we get to that, I would like to open the floor to questions from you guys. So please feel free to ask the panelists any questions.
I would like to make sure I understand this, because my 84-year-old brain is not as swift as my 44-year-old brain, which wasn't that swift anyway. I need to make sure I understand what you said. You were saying the things that FEMA and the Corps of Engineers were saying we couldn't get to a certain group of people in Puerto Rico. And you are saying that your group was able to do that. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Because before I go around and stopping every person I see, do you know what this group did? I want to make sure I understand exactly right what you did. It was amazing, and I'm so happy to hear that you're going to have a documentary and all of the publicity that we can possibly give it. Please keep us apprised of where it is. And you literally blew my mind with that story.
We blew our own minds. Right, we didn't believe it would happen, but Jimmy Dunson, who was like the father of all of this, they started out 10 years ago. They came to Louisiana 2 years after
After
Irma.
Katrina, you're saying.
Katrina. There's so many.
Yeah. It's,
We need to ungender them though.
but people have to know that.
I have something for you. I want to bless you. There is a documentary already, right? There's a 30-minute documentary. It's 30 minutes long. It was done by Submedia. This Franklin Lopez is from Puerto Rico, lives in California, met us on the island to do a documentary. The portion of the interview that I did, literally, we were less than an hour off of the subway. We spent most of the time on the Walgreens parking lot, right? And looking for the place called Vietnam. These people.
Okay, I'm going to get that afterwards because I don't have any. So you're going to give me all those contacts later.
Right, I'm going to give them to you. But they had voted. They had stood for this homeland that was theirs, and they didn't want to move, and they wanted that space on the port. So this is a little community, a humble community that is on the port in Puerto Rico. And so they've been neglected for their resistance. And so it's a very dilapidated, humble community. And so we went straight from the airport to Vietnam, and literally, I'm standing there with a stethoscope. I mean, the braids were so tight because my scalp was braided to the I couldn't think. And people were asking for, they just wanted ibuprofen. They just wanted pain pills. You know, the things that we get up in the morning, you have a bad shoulder, you take a pill and you don't think about it. And so they wanted ibuprofen, they wanted someone to look at their baby, and it was crazy, right? It was wild. And Franklin said, "Can I interview you?" And literally I'm standing in this puddle, and he said, "Stand right there." And I'm like, "There's water." He says, "Well, that's the best life." So I'm standing in a puddle, interviewing less than an hour off the plane on that. Little did we know there would be so much more to tell. But Submedia did this 32-minute documentary. You can go on to Mutual Aid Disaster Relief, our Facebook page. It's the one, it's not a group, it's an actual page. And you can see all of this documentarian over here, our videographer and photographer, Greg Cruz, did all of this amazing video. There are live videos where we're standing at the top of these mountains with these vibrant communities. The resilience of these communities is mind-boggling. And we have all of these stories, all of these pictures of us in Puerto Rico, and this 32-minute documentary, No Permission Needed is the name of it.
No permission, okay.
You know, it's apropos.
I think she's taking notes and I'll get it. Yeah.
Just one quick question. Did you say there were just 10 of you that did this?
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just 10
Yeah.
from all over, did you say? What from different?
We were from Tampa, we
Just
came from
10? Wow.
Yeah.
What is that?
You're taking notes?
Yeah,
so-
I'm taking
okay, good.
Never doubt that a small group of community
Right.
people can change the world. In fact, it was the
Yeah,
only thing
that-
that ever has.
Say the name of the documentary one more time.
No Permission Needed, and it's on sub.media.
So in other words, your preparations for Irma were catapulted to take you to Puerto Rico. And you used all your free thinking and helped new sparks. And you even went in reverse direction, except you didn't negotiate with the pastor. You just like acted the part and you got what you needed.
Is he in here?
Yeah. I remember
Hide in
that
the
part.
corner.
You're a pretty sneaky lady. My question would be, as riveting as the Puerto Rico story was, and we'll continue to follow that, you didn't get a chance to tell us how you got involved in Black Lives Matters after you left drug company and decided to, drug state, and decided to come here. If you don't mind telling us if there are any issues there,
Okay.
legislative issues, and how you got involved.
Okay, there is some legislation and tied up in there. So I'll try to be brief, because what time are we in?
We have a little bit.
Okay.
We have more than a half an hour.
Oh, good. So the Black Lives Matter was something I was working with Charlie Crist campaign We finished that campaign, and I was minding my own business. That's
Sure.
how all
No,
of these
you
shows
weren't.
start. And someone by the name of Chris Wilson, and the community organizer, was working on a case of Brittany Overstreet, a young woman who was brutalized by cops in the school, slammed, had her jaw wired shut. As you remember that? Okay, and so Crystal was looking for help. Susie Shannon worked at UNF. She said, there's this young woman, I really think you ought to meet her. And I was like, I promised myself no Florida organizing because #Florida. And I'm not gonna stay here. I'm definitely not gonna get involved in these folks' problems.
Famous last words.
Oh, okay, right. And I'm not looking for anything like that. And so reluctantly I go to this meeting, and this woman is full of all types of ideas, already has a really organic foothold in the community, and is just teeming with this force. So I got something. And I said, have you thought about organizing under, it was almost happenstance. Have you thought about organizing under the Black Lives Matter banner? It's really hot right now. You know, it's gonna be a huge draw, like give you more visibility for this case, and you know, kind of be able to help you galvanize and mobilize a little bit better. Oh, I thought about it. Oh yeah, sure, okay. So then the kid, Chris, said, I'll put up the page. So there was a Facebook page that went up. It went up as an online forum. It was a place for people to come and talk about the issues, maybe become informed about the issues. Never intended to actually become a network chapter. That was not a goal that we had, right? But it wasn't a goal to actually get swatted in Puerto Rico either. But, so we started off slowly. We didn't even know.
When was that?
What
Year was that?
That was December 2016, December 2015. And so it turned into, oh, we have Black Lives Matter in Tampa? And I was like, no, we don't. We don't have one. This is a website, right? You can come here and look at us, and we can look at you. But we're not going to be doing anything more than that. And then finally, we heard that there was a network that was emerging, a national network. We heard about a convening of the movement for Black Lives. That turned into a huge police action, but I digress. So we get on the plane and we go to Cleveland, and we meet all of these people who are in the movement for Black liberation from all over the United States. These people have a language, they have a culture, they have like their whole social justice codices. We, never knew this was happening here in the world. These young people are on fire. They're like, no fucks given, let's do this, burn it all down if we have to. I had never seen such raw. I mean, we've gone through so much in this country in 400 years to keep that African resilience and vitality under wraps. When at the convening of the movement for Black Lives, my old self, I felt like the lid had come off of that.
The tipping point.
It was the tipping point. Critical mass. It was when you were there, you felt like critical mass had been reached. And there's this one picture where you can see the elders, people that started wearing the African garb in the 60s and through the 80s, sitting in the front. I mean, the gray hair, these gray-haired witnesses who had been here. You could see our trans community. You could see our queer community being highlighted. You could see people, it was multi-generational, and it was beautiful. And there was 3 days of just Black love, which is something we don't get to do. Other peoples get to do that. And we had the Black codes that made sure that didn't become a thing, right? And so it was happening in this space. We were ungendering the bathrooms. We put signs over, the bathrooms, and it was a step. We stepped at a time, and we were using an app, and that you'd get a text saying, "Come to the courtyard," and you go down to the courtyard, and someone had gone to Home Depot and bought 5-gallon buckets, turned them upside down, and were using paint sticks. And I get goosebumps when I tell you because people were dancing, just African dance, just there in the courtyard. And it was so incredible to see Black people not thinking of themselves through that lens that we're always taught to cap it. Don't be too much. Don't make yourself visible. Like women too, any marginalized people, shrink into your space. Don't take up too much space. And all of this energy had just been unleashed. And it changed me. That was the moment where I said to myself, there's something here for me. And I wanted to be in it in any capacity that I would be permitted to be in it. And so when we came back, we thought it's time now to have meetings. Let's tell the community about this thing that's happened, that we've seen. And we had started to have meetings. And it became a thing where we could put up an event and hundreds of people would just pour into the streets. We didn't even know, I mean, I've never organized like that. You know, I'd be going around in a suit glad handing, you know, and changing cards of people I'm never gonna see again. But this was a new way. It was organic, it was flat-footed. It was like the difference between country belly dancing and city belly dancing. The city belly, they dance on heels in the city. There's small steps, right? In the country, it's flat-footed and it's big steps. And this is what it felt like, that contrast. And so we brought the community into that unapologetic blackness, you know, where we could say, I've got something to say about the way that I'm treated and the way that I feel forced to be in this world. And I'm going to say it now. And you all are going to take your seats and listen or get the fuck out of my face. And that was the first time in my life that I felt less angry. I felt less of that Baldwin rage then. And I believe that this thing has taken so many turns and unexpected shapes. And there's been several different iterations of this. Some of them have been mean and ugly. Some of them have been beautiful and buoyant, but it's a story that tells itself. 400 years of black suppression in a country is a story that's been told over and over again. You know, Alice Walker has told it, and Maya Angelou has told it, and James Baldwin told it, and Lorraine Hansberry told it. And we hear tell that Harriet Tubman told it on those trails at night. But this is a new generation, and these young people want to tell their version of that story, and they're doing it. And many of us don't understand it because it's not really our story. So what we've done now is we're waiting. We're kind of holding it as a community asset, and we're waiting for those people who have that fire in the belly. Like what we saw in Puerto Rico come out of that team, that by any means necessary, let's put aside our self-obsession and just do this work. And so we're holding it in our hands and we're waiting for someone to come and pull the sword out of that stone. And those people haven't come forward yet. And when they do, they can take this asset and do with it what they will.
So, just a question, what happened to all the people who came to the meetings?
What happened to all those people?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. Pastor, I hear you laughing. Because he kept telling me, where's your thing? Like, what are you gonna do with these people? I think that what we did with those people are Surge. Those people are in the Community Protection Coalition. Those people are at CARE. Those people were activated.
Got it.
Our primary job was to mobilize. We brought a lot of people. D'Angelo Bone wasn't an activist. Now he heads up Surge, right? Jamila Passmore was in the military and had never done any activism and is now running for County Commission 5. I think that we're seeing there's a next generation step that having that vital and that visible of an organization in Tampa has generated something else. We don't need to own it. Remember, there was a story that was telling itself. So people took what they needed and then they moved out in the community. Some of those people are at the Florida, Organized Florida. So they're everywhere, that's where they are.
They became proselytizers, in a sense.
Well, you know, we're not liberals, so yeah. But I started there. I was a regional director for Hillary Clinton in 2007. You know, and now I show up on videos that look talking about anarchy. I think people have to take their progression naturally.
Any other questions? Any questions for Pam?
Yeah, I had a question. I'm from California, and immigration is a big thing out there. Immigrant rights struggle. There's so many undocumented people. There's so many immigrant people, and the way the state in capitalism treats them is disgusting. It's insulting. and it just makes so many people want to fight. I was really interested to hear your report about the immigrant rights struggle over here. I think it's very important. I'm going to read through this document. I was going to ask what your organization or what you think about DACA, about those attacks. And maybe also I was going to ask if you had time to say also something about your view of the Trump administration. I mean, there's, you know, a lot of people hate him, and understandably so, because he built his campaign on, in a lot of ways, on anti-immigrant bigotry, and whipped up a lot of that, you know, reactionary hysteria.
Yeah, I feel that Florida has given so much to the immigrant rights movement in the whole country. Yeah, as I started with the Immigrant Youth Network. The DREAM Act was in, like, when we started fighting in 2010 when I joined the immigrant rights youth movement. It was a small group of people. And some of my colleagues, including Isabel, who's now back at FLIC, walked from Miami to DC with Felipe, his partner, Felipe, and then Gabi Pacheco, and then Carlos Roja, who's now in Illinois. And they walked 15 miles to DC to what was call attention to the plight of undocumented youth in Florida and in the country. So if I think about what Florida has done in terms of the immigrant rights movement, I always go back to the Trail of Dreams, which was called when these 4 youth from Florida walked by foot, and it took them months, and they stopped and they talked to families all in every stop, right? And they built as they went by. And when I grew up undocumented, I remember that was something you didn't share. It was something that you repressed. And I get a little emotional every time I go back, because I just, like, we're going through so much right now, and how, like, our families are having to be pushed back into kind of like a shadow. And I think back of like the Trail of Dream and what that was. And it brings just so much like joy and so much unapologetic resiliency and like now I'm seeing new youth come up too. That like, for example, some youth that we're working with in Clearwater, and I'm telling them about these stories about how Florida was Florida. And like the youth are right now, yeah, in some very challenging times, like not unlike the ones that I feel like 7 years ago when we started this fight for the DREAM Act. So the DREAM Act, like, everybody knows what the DREAM Act is. Yeah, so that's like undocumented youth, the lack of access to education, like now in the country. Anybody who associates like the Dreamer, because it was like this act that was introduced that would permanently grant undocumented youth legal status, right? And with that, the ability to access education and do so much more. Like in 2010, I was in DC for when the vote happened and the DREAM Act didn't go down. And I remember seeing all of my friends broken, right? Because like we thought that was like, you know, but then we went into this beautiful church, and Reverend Myers was there too. We went into this church and like we had two, I remember Renata, she's from Boston, from Brazil. And Renata just like uplifted that space and said, hey, like we did it, we're gonna do it again. Like now people didn't even know who we are. They know who the fuck we are, and we'll continue like this fight. And what did that mean, right? So in 2012, when we decided to fight for DACA, it was because, yeah, you know what happened with the Obama administration. We had over 2 million deportations under Obama, which we're still very, very angry. While everybody in the movement was telling us, hey, you guys can't go after Obama because he's the president and he's our friend, and blah, 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 blah. The story is very long. But undocumented youth was, no, we're not going to compromise. They did their research and they said, hey, we're going to make sure that like we pressure Obama into doing an executive action because we know he has the power to, right? And undocumented youth, including the ones from Florida, Like, I remember for his campaign, he had his campaign office in Tampa. Like, we were doing actions outside of his office. We had hunger strikes. We had, like, every type of action you can name to pressure Obama to fight it for the DREAM Act. I remember shutting Hillary's speeches in D.C., in Virginia. Then we went to Connecticut and we shut his shit down there too. So like, a lot of people don't know the backstories of these fights, right? And what goes into. And I remember us going to Alabama, right? To Alabama when there was like this really hateful anti-immigrant bill in Alabama, and driving up with my friends and also like standing in solidarity and stopping a lot of other bad stuff. So I feel like the immigrant rights movement in Florida has been a force to be reckoned with. And how we continue to fight right now for DACA. What we're doing is that we did protection clinics. We did DACA clinics that we obviously wanted to help the youth that could qualify to get the extension. So like, there's a 6-month gap, like from September 6th to March 6th, that if anyone could apply. We organized clinic, we got scholarship. One of the good things of how we've organized is that a lot of people, as I shared, know who Dreamers are and what's the story there. That I feel like many years ago, we were just building on that. And with that came a lot of support. We got scholarships for everyone, like covered, like that's over $400 for every person who asked for it, that needed it. And as you know, like, most of our youth are struggling as it is. And then right now we have a bus that's actually going to DC to fight for the DREAM Act. And that's a lot of new leaders that are like leaving from Florida. We have 3 buses, 2 leaving from Miami and 1 leaving from Tampa next week. And that's over 100 folks that are going to DC. And to join an action to like call for the DREAM Act, a clean DREAM Act. And what does a clean DREAM Act mean? That it's like, obviously they're trying to put enforcement into the policies. So they're trying to like use our youth, what they've fought for, to like build a border and get more enforcement policies. And the youth have said, no, not on our name, not on our back, and what we have accomplished. And also not on our families. Like, you can't give me papers when my parents, you're gonna go after my parents, or like, you know. So that's happening now. The youth leave like this, it's gonna be on the 9th. So look at the news, massive actions are gonna happen for the DREAM Act, for a clean DREAM Act. And that's all because of, as I said, people from Florida who have been organizing for years in solidarity with everyone in the country who was in this plight.
I actually remember going myself in 2010 to their big rally in Washington, D.C. with my little son and my mom. And now, you know, he was 9 at that time. He's older now, and it's like, we're still doing this, you know? And I thought there will be a reason for that. I am going to take one more question. We are running out of time, but while we add it, and when you answer after this question, if you can just include the steps that people can take in action and how they can support while we have the topic, and then the same question will be for you. We'll take one last question.
So my question was on that, actually. It was, you know, how do you recommend for people in the room to, when we're talking about the issue of immigrant rights, we, you know, stay away from the narrative of like good immigrant versus bad immigrant, and you know, how do we move towards making like legalization for all?
Yeah, and that's actually hits like really home to me, because as I share, like I have 2 brothers and they're both immigrants. And criminalization in our communities looks different for everyone, right? As 2 black men, like their stories are totally different from mine, and like we share so much of the same life. So criminalization, like in how it affects our families, is very scary, and how like our families are targeted. Like one of my brother, he's facing possibly like even deportation because of a weed charge over 10 years ago. And then my older brother, you know, the war on drugs and whatnot, he's like, also the good thing is that he did became a citizen because my mom. So we lived in mixed status families, and some of us like don't live in mixed status, so our whole families are undocumented. But that fear of deportation is always there. And what we see is that there is that narrative of good versus good, bad immigrants. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody screws up or whatnot. And it's very hurtful when we see a narrative that puts, oh no, because they're the good ones and these are the bad ones, without understanding like the harm that we're doing to each other, right? The harm that we're doing to what happens to our lives, right? And that the family separation that can go with that as well. So we're very, very careful to not do that as when we're sharing our stories. And I feel like now there's more awareness. Like before, there wasn't. And even if when we talk about Black immigrants versus like other immigrants from different backgrounds, yeah, we know that there is obviously all these intersections of Black immigrants' lives that come together, including what criminalization is, right? And what people don't know is that like there's also this like image of who like Black immigrants are, right? Or Black people in general, and actually Black immigrants are the ones that have more college degrees, are exceeding like the most. So like there's like these negative stereotypes that also supersede everything that's happening, right? So we have to be very careful of what we paint of each other and our families. And I know we're building more solidarity across who we are. There's the Undocu Black network that I invite people to check. And there's also been the Black Immigrant Network that have multiple reports on those experiences of Black immigrants. And then there's also now like new research on what like especially like women and detention and how that fits into like families and mothers going into being criminalized for simple facts of driving without a license or coming an abusive relationship. So it's like more women than anyone else is like in detention or jails because of criminalization. So we have to understand what that means, right? And anybody, I feel like anybody, how criminalization works in this country, anybody can go to jail for any simple thing. So it's like we have to go away from saying, oh, like it's a criminal, because the criminals could obviously be any one of us for any little thing. So so what I do invite folks is to like, yeah, like look more up on that and like help us like stop this good, bad versus immigrant narrative, and understand that if what I tend to tell folks is like if an immigrant youth or for example my brothers like could mess up, like they don't have the same like versus their counterparts or white, their messing up is triple or four times the consequences.
And that calls for deportation.
And it
even
calls
though
for
it's something
deportation.
minor that was forever ago. There's really no second chance.
There's no second chance in that sense.
And that will be the case even, it doesn't matter if you're a parent, if you have 3-4 kids to take care of, they don't care. They'll send you back just for something that minor, that long ago.
And under the Trump administration, like the stakes are even higher, right? Like he's invested massive amount of money into training more folks to do immigration work and mostly enforcement. Like we are preparing rates response work with a lot of our community partners. We can start rates response work in your respective community. Just let us know how we can support that and bring a network together. And in terms of that, also the protection work that we're doing, right? So like we had the DACA clinic to make sure that if any youth was able to qualify for that extension, they could, because that means they have a driver's license and they have a permit that would not, grant them some type of security. And then we're doing legal screenings and family preparedness plans, just because we do have, sadly, to prepare for the worst. And it's better that families understand their risk and that we're taking actions together to be prepared for the good or the bad, And we have a clinic that's going to be coming up on the December 3rd here in Sarasota. Palmetto, at a big church that Victor has been helping us put together. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And the same question for you, Donna. How can people take action in order to support the work that you are doing? What can they do?
So many things. One, you can check the mutual aid page and my personal page if you care to send me a friend request for the fundraiser for the documentary. We're probably going to do a crowd fund where you guys would get a release of that screening first, depending on, you know, what levels you come in at as a sponsor. Right, I just made that up.
Go, George.
Yeah, I'm just working it out as I'm talking to you. And Greg is like, I've heard that before. I've never heard that. So I had to respond to that. And so we plan on doing that. So you can come to, we'd like for you to like the Mutual Aid Disaster Relief page, because I didn't say it earlier, but it's horizontal aid. So in this case, what horizontal aid looks like is this in action. There are some people who live in a very fine community, and someone saw our call for goods donations. And they said people were taking their stuff back to Publix, right? And Publix is throwing these things away because they've been touched by human hands. Like they weren't stocked by human hands. Well, anyway, they don't know the integrity of the items, so they throw the items away. So we said, bring those items to your neighbor, and your neighbor will collect those items, and then we will come and retrieve those items from your neighbors. So there's another 6 tons of stuff just sitting around, right? And so that model, how is it different from charity? Because people, I spoke at a conference and people were like, no, that's charity. Charity is when you give someone something without examining the underlying cause of their need. Solidarity seeks to eliminate the cause for their need. So it's not like Jesus in a sandwich, and there's no shade on Jesus. But it is saying, we're going to help you self-determine if you want to eliminate this situation, right? We will support you in your self-determination and walk you through that process, but you have to inform us what your needs are. And that's why this model is liberating, right? As opposed to, we write grants and we give to the people in need. And like, why do we have so many people in need? Benjamin Franklin said a society that creates beggars, it's a normal society. A society that creates legions of beggars needs to examine itself. And we know where we are on that continuum, right? As a nation, as a planet. So come to an orientation in Tampa. Read about the mutual aid model if you're not familiar with it. You don't have to come and do it through us. The beauty of the mutual aid model is that it's decentralized. Anyone, like the woman who came crying and she says, I want to do something, and then it turns into this whole thing. So there's that. Look at how that works. Even FEMA has written a report on the mutual aid model and has given it a thumbs up, right? Okay. Too bad we can't do the same for them. We can't be in a reciprocal relationship. So there's that. Black Lives Matter, I think that, like I said, we're holding this asset and we're waiting to see the emergence of that organizing talent. I think there's the raw skill, right? It's the combination of, like, there's some charisma, there's a raw intellectual power, and there's a fearlessness that's required to take all of the beatings that come from sitting at the helm of something that unpopular, you know, and that exciting at the same time. And to be able to ride that without getting seduced by it and consumed, right? It's like riding a beast, you know, and it takes a certain personality to do that. Ruth has that personality, debates cops on live TV. Yes, let me tell you. So there's that. With the NAACP, I am the Empowerment Center Manager for the NAACP. And what that looks like is us funneling some of those funds away from these massive developmental, multi-billion-dollar contracts on a PBX, Department of Transportation. It requires a lot of time sitting in meetings and listening to people who can't understand the charts that their secretaries made for them. Try to explain them to people who actually do understand them, and that's what that consists of mostly. But we're trying to funnel money and revitalization into the community to eliminate the need for charity, right? Because people are now able to, you know, get a job that pays a living wage and self-determine. So it seems like they're despairing things, and sometimes I get confused about whether or not I wear the fatigue jacket or the heels. Like, I'm like, who am I today, right? Because we wear a lot of hats. And so we're working really hard to try to recruit people into this. Ruth wants to open a vagina steaming business.
Awesome. I get it.
Right.
It's like herbal. It's very
Everyone's been educated. Thank you, Ruth.
It's a mix of herbals, and it's very beneficial and very healthy for not only the vagina, but for your overall health. And it helps with fibroids, and other women's issues as well. It helps, boost fertility and all of that.
So whoever edits this video is going to be like, I bit my sandwich.
Why should they edit anything?
Hey, women and men will love it.
I'm not going to try to interpret that at all. But the reason why I said that out loud was because there's going to be a lot of business emerging. There's a lot of high-dollar jobs come into Tampa. Then all of these little boutique businesses crop up. And we were looking at these charts the other day of women in business, and we see that the smallest portion of certain businesses, government contracts in public schools, for instance, we're talking about $5.6 million going to white women, $6.5 million going to white men. This is just in the Hillsborough County School District. We're talking about $13.7 million going to Latin males and $112,000 going to black women.
Wow.
Right. And so when the developers were asking me, well, what do you think about? I said, well, this, for people who can understand this actual graph, it says that that black women are the largest segment of the population opening businesses. And this also includes black women and immigrant groups who are highly educated. And so there's a big opening for us to start talking to black women about being business owners. And who knows better how to make an economy work than someone who constantly is forced to make $1 out of 15 cents. And so what part of my job is going to be in 2018 is starting with resume shops, showing people how to get into Sunbiz, how to get into Demand Star and look at bids, how to become a supplier, how to become a supplier for government contractors, quelling their fears about it takes so long to get paid. Not if you're a community, not if you're a state contractor in the state of Florida. They have 14 days to get you a check. Right? So these businesses aren't collapsing under government bureaucracy. So we're going to be teaching that to women, assessing their health and readiness, not just women, but primarily minority women, assessing their readiness and financial health as it is, and then showing them the landscape of what they need to do to open their vagina steaming business, right? And as these high-dollar jobs come into Tampa, you're going to see these businesses start acupuncture centers. You're going to see boutiques, just knitted baby caps and different types of yarn. And so women who want to participate in those types of businesses are going to receive some really solid training. There are organizations who say they do that, but when someone walks in the door and says, I don't know anything about being in business, but I really want to be in business, it's going to be our job as an agency that grows to be able to assess hundreds of people in their readiness to engage in commerce like that, right? Because you heard what Reverend Meyer said earlier about the Chamber of Commerce and how they direct business so that certain people get into business and then those money and that real estate stays in certain populations and we continue to need charity. So we eliminate charity by getting down into the juice of this thing, the roots, and moving those things around. So that's number 3. So I think that the documentary, going to the Mutual Aid Disaster Relief page, looking at that, liking that page, looking for those fundraisers, sharing them. If you are not in a position to give and you've given already, it's the end of the year, you've given at the office, share that thing on your page with your friends. Tell people who appreciate that type of thing, this guerrilla medicing that we're doing. I didn't get to tell you guys about Tito. I should know about Tito, right? Tito was a beautiful story. We went to Tito's house, and I was like, why are we coming up here? These people have money, because there's this castle over here. So we get up to the top of the hill, and Des and Greg go in, and they come out, because they're doing I'm trained as a respiratory therapist. Doesn't make sense, I know. And so they're doing the nursing and I'm doing the medical. And they go in and they come out and they give me numbers. They say 191 over 121, 300 for the blood sugar. He's tachycardic. What's his heart rate? It's like 112, 102. I said, you guys, we can't do anything with that. That has to be treated in a hospital. This guy's close to death. He's dying. Let's get him out of here. He's probably dehydrated. He has hypertension. His heart is exhausted. If he hasn't infarcted, he's going to, let's get him in truck and get him downhill. So we get him down to the hospital, and Greg and Des go out, and they're talking to the FEMA tent. And once again, people with their 2 thumbs down, they say, it's dark. We can't take patients after dark. And I was like, what is that sun doing?
Just like it's as the sun is setting.
Yeah. The sun is still way up there. So Greg films it. Of course, they, y'all being the badasses that you are, gave them a piece of your whole mind. That happened. There's video of that on the mutual aid page. All of this stuff is documented. It's all true stories. I'm in there with Tito. He's drinking like water, like cold water. He says he hasn't had cold water in a month. These are things we forget when we live in these situations where we always have lights and we always have cold water and we always are able to go into the KFC and cool off from this 150. Imagine if you weren't for 30 days. Imagine if your toilet didn't flush for 30 days. We got there at the 28-day mark, right? So Tito was in the hospital, and I'm reading the EKG. And the nurse says, you know something about that? I said, a little bit. But would you please tell me? I'm just gonna. They said that Tito had an infarct, and with the crushing pain in the center of his chest, was getting ready to go again. And this would probably be a massive one. His heart attacks get bigger, right? And so they said that we had saved his life, and they gave us pastries. They were not gluten-free, so I did not partake. But we're pretty sure that Tito is okay because he made it to the ER. But I think another 24 hours, my medical training tells me another 24 hours, Tito would not be with us. So we're going to talk to Tito. It's going to be a part of that documentary when we go back. And so we'll get to follow up and see that so that people know that everyday people say, oh, we don't have licenses. And I'm going to say this on the camera because you can't do anything about it out there in whatever land. We had antibiotics. We had prescription drugs. Right? We did what we had to do to save people's lives. We found a doctor who would write us prescriptions for insulin to replace insulin. We did what we had to do to save people's lives. And we will continue to do what we have to do to save people's lives. And we will engage anyone who wants to do that work. So if you'd like to be a part of future missions to Puerto Rico, remember this is solidarity, right? It's not ecotourism. He came to the parade and he was like, rad. I was like, he's not right for this. This is not rad, right? These are people's lives. And the last thing I'll tell you is my own personal story in connection to Luisa and how this came to be something that's in my heart, right? I hope this doesn't sound corny, but I was in New York City in 2013, and a guy walks up to me at Brooklyn Tabernacle and he says, you know, you represent the people of Luisa, Puerto Rico. I'm like, dude, I'm a Black American, what are you talking about? And he said, you look just like the people in Luisa, Puerto Rico. And so I wanted to know more about this because, you know, we African Americans are rootless. You know, we know that our roots are in Africa. We have roots all over the world. We don't know where they are, right? My last name is Davis. That's the #1 surname in Wales. I'm not Welsh. Maybe a little. Maybe. Davies and Davis are #1 surname. So I went and I looked it up and I found a picture. There was no name attached to the picture, but the picture did look strikingly, you know, it resembled me at the time, especially when I'm in northern climates. And I used it as a profile photo. And people said, oh, what a lovely photo of you. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, God. Right? So then something else happened next was Eric Montoya came on and he said, I love this photo by Samuel Lind. That was just last night. And so I go and I look up Samuel Lind, and his studio was in Luisa. Mm. And he's painted all of these pictures of this woman. I think her name is Yorisa. And my husband, he was standing over my shoulder looking at him like, this is incredible. And so now I have to go to Samuel Lind's studio, and he's going to think I'm insane. I'll be crying in the studio. I'm like, what's happening here? But he is... Yeah, we're doing it. Real time. We're still doing it. We left people in Puerto Rico in charge of that, so that's what you're getting there on Zello. And so I get to do something for myself in all of this service to others, is I get to look for my African roots, because they're not just in Africa. Some of them are in Brazil, and some of them are in Haiti, and some of them are on the island of Puerto Rico, and some of them are in the El Yunque rainforest, which is where we'll be going. But we're going to tell you that story. So Yeah, we didn't sell them, we did not sell them feds. We did provide people with the medical care that they needed to keep them alive, and we're gonna go back and do more of that. So please go to the page and do what you can for that.
So that trip is December 7th or 12th.
Well, we have people going in on the 21st. They're gonna do the first,
November.
November the 21st to
The
the
first trip, the second
24th.
trip.
Jane just left, right?
So no, so the first part is infrastructure. So solar panels, like the whole idea, we talked about solidarity, I keep saying it because I want you guys to remember this. We're not just asking JEA, the people, to restore electricity. What we're doing is a massive fundraising project. They said they're doing Light Up Puerto Rico, we're trying to light up Puerto Rico too. Led by Puerto Ricans who inform us of what their needs are. Infrastructure team from Louisiana, led by a woman named Rain, who is a structural engineer and civil engineer, are in Puerto Rico right now on the ground, installing solar panels and water filtration systems to be left in place to allow those folks to become self-sustaining and self-determining, and we continue to raise money for that too. So there's several different fundraisers, and that is for a free Puerto Rico. That's gonna allow Puerto Ricans to be able to self-determine if they would, and I think they do, but that they have to self-determine if they want to decolonize. There's going to have to be some freedom to be able to do that. And by helping Puerto Ricans filter their own water and draw their own electricity, we're going to be able to help them realize that dream, right? Because they told us what we want you to do is stand in solidarity with us, raise hell on the mainland, and tell our stories, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you. So thank you so much for being here with us, to both of you. And again, please give a round of applause to Pam and to and thank you so much for sharing your stories. And I encourage each of you to help however you can. Please go to the Facebook pages. Please look up what's going on with Florida Immigration Coalition and any future actions that you can help with, particularly if you don't work and you can take certain trips to Tallahassee from time to time. That'll be very helpful because they do need, the actual bodies there from time to time.
If I could make an ending announcement, we're all going to go back to the main room again for the closing. We're going to have a wrap up by Arlene, and the Reverend is going to give the closing remarks.